Hey crew, so the question is, when should I use displacement, normal, or height maps? I think that displacement, normal, and bump maps, which is probably what you're referring to, I think they're all height maps. Okay, so these are maps, textures that are going to influence the way the light is calculated across the surface. So a bump map will go up and down into and out of the mesh, right? And following along the polygon normal. Normal maps will actually redirect the normal based off of RGB information into the X, Y, and Z axes. So you can redirect that normal. That means you have 3 times the information in a normal map that you do in a bump map. So normal maps are almost always going to look better than bump maps when you talk about fine details. But maybe you don't need that additional axis when you're talking about like a bump map that is like I don't want to say bricks. The reason why like the brick grout could be good for a bump map because it basically only goes up and down. Now, of course, a normal map will help with the detail, the surface detail of the grout and of the bricks, but a bump map will actually inform it how high into and out of the polygon it is. So if you have really deep brick grout around these bricks, like you imagine like it's actually deep enough for you to put your fingers in there, then you would a normal map's probably not going to give you that range of depth because it's just going to redirect the normal angle, right? Versus a height map will also redirect the normal angle, but based on the depth and the height in your bump map node that you're plugging the bump map into. I'm infinitely mirrored here. Displacement maps actually allow you to translate the vertices into and out of the polygon normal. So if you have a single polygon there and its normal is facing towards camera and you've got a brick displacement map on there, then the white values will go towards camera and the black values will go away from camera. Now, of course, that's just because it's facing the camera. If it was facing up like this, right, then the brick grout, the black values will go into that polygon and the white values will go out of that polygon. So anytime that you can see the actual change in geometry in the silhouette, you're probably going to need to use a displacement map. They even use displacement maps to display skin details because as you can see, if I go like this, you see like these wrinkles that appear on my head here. It's actually casting a little bit of a shadow. Now, maybe from this camera angle, you could do that with a bump map or maybe a bump and normal map, combine them. So you get the bump to bring it out a little bit and the normal to kind of change the angle direction across that little thing, right? But if you have any, like if it's for film or for TV shows or anything like that, like all these details that appear, even the pores and the little bumps and stuff, like all that stuff needs to be displaced because it's going to look a lot more realistic if it is. Like you're going to get cast shadows that actually cast accurately. So if you can support the render time, displacement would be fantastic for everything, unless it's so far in the background that it doesn't need it, or even honestly just not a close-up. It really depends. Like you can take a single plane wall, and if it's a brick wall, you use displacement on it. But if you're doing it in real-time rendering engine, then you can't use displacement on it. You can only use bump maps and normal maps on it because most engines don't support real-time displacement. There have been some that support real-time displacement. Like in 2010, there was this game called Stalker that was like the first real-time displacement video game engine ever. But I literally haven't heard of it happening since then, and that was, over 10 years ago. So it's not something that's really being pushed forward because if you increase the poly count and you have a nice high-resolution normal map, then real-time engines are going to get you by. More than displacement, because when you use a displacement map, you have to subdivide your mesh at render times so many times that you have enough faces to support the level of detail that you need to capture and not any more than you need to capture. So you could actually calculate that by calculating the number of pixels in a document and then calculating the number of polygons there will be after subdivision. And if there are more polygons than there are pixels, then you have vertices that are just not going to move, right? But if you have more pixels than polygons, as will most often be the case, then you're going to get an average of that pixel color on each vertice. So that's why if you have a single plane and you subdivide it once, it's like one little cone comes out. If you're like displacing a castle, right? One little cone comes out because you subdivided it once. So now there's one vertice in the middle. But if you subdivide it twice, you know, it went from 1 polygon to 4 polygons to 16 polygons. And now you can see kind of the blobby shape. 3 times is 30, 4 times 16 is 64, and then 5 times 64 times 4 is 256, and then I believe, and then 4 times, you have to check the math on this. Not that it matters, but, you know, multiply it subdivision after subdivision iteration, and then you start to get a polygon mesh that's high enough resolution to actually support all the pixels in your displacement map. And that's going to look awesome because, hey, it's way easier to paint detail like that in Photoshop or Painter or using a sculpting software that exports out a displacement map like ZBrush. It's way easier to use those other tools than it is to poly model all that shit in Maya. It's just gonna take you too long, and for some objects it's practically impossible. So ZBrush is actually, because 99% of what ZBrush is used for is actually just exporting out displacement maps to be rendered by ray tracers in Maya or Blender or wherever, you know, Max, whatever you're doing. You could kind of consider ZBrush a texturing program. It's not really like, it's not a modeling software. You're not, well, I guess you can make, I don't know what they're, Dynamesh or whatever, but you're not messing with topology really. Like, though, I mean, you can, it's also that, but for most use cases, ZBrush is used as a texturing software because you can export out a displacement map, apply that to the low poly you sculpted on, and then you have your high resolution rendered at render time, but not in the scene blowing up your Maya. So does that answer your question?